controversial topics. Although we often overlook the fact, every single species inhabiting Earth relies on one another despite their rank on the food chain to survive. Yet this fragile coexistence depends on a precarious balance, one that has been in jeopardy since humans have become the dominant species. The history of human impact on wolves exemplifies the current situation thousands of species face. The rapid decline of certain animal populations is not coincidental nor natural, and nearly all the factors that lead to the endangerment of animals can be traced back to one source: human overpopulation. In 1973, the Endangered Species Act was created for the purpose of preserving threatened and endangered species and the habitats they depend on. Under the Act, the sale, transport, and possession of selected species is illegal. The Act also allows specific areas of land to be preserved for rehabilitation sanctuaries, and penalties to be inflicted on those who defy the law. For a species to be put on the list, there must be a monitoring period, in which the animal is classified at risk of extinction. For species to be removed from the Oregon ESA, the species must be able to maintain stable populations with natural reproduction, the species' habitat must be substantial, no form of overutilization, commercial, scientific, or recreational, will be likely to occur, and necessary regulations must be in effect in order to preserve a healthy population. One animal that was placed on the list and recently removed was the gray wolf. In 1978, gray wolves were declared endangered in Montana. Since then, debate of their removal has been very controversial. Many farmers feel cheated, claiming that the wolf population is flourishing rather than at risk, and feel powerless as they watch the wolves kill their livestock but are unable to shoot. Just last year, May 5, 2011, gray wolves in the northern Rocky Mountains were removed from the endangered species list. And on January 27th of this year, gray wolves in the western Great Lakes and Minnesota were classified as a recovered species, no longer requiring the protection of federal laws. But it is still unclear if wolves will remain off the endangered species list for long. Habitat destruction is the major contributing factor to the endangerment and extinction of species. California, Florida, and Texas are the top 3 states in the U.S. where habitat destruction affects species the most. The human population now numbers beyond 7 billion, and is expected to reach 9 billion by the year 2050. In order to house our enormous population, there has been an increase in land development. Urban sprawl poses a major threat to the environment, and consequently species existence. Our standard of living has put severe strains on the Earth's resources. Not only are humans encroaching more and more onto the environment, but also human expansion has resulted in habitat fragmentation. Habitat fragmentation is the idea that human land occupation patterns are limiting suitable areas for animals to live. The wild is being sliced up into regions, and animals are becoming more exposed to people. Fragmentation often leads to isolation in smaller populations. With smaller populations, chances of extinction are higher. Wolves used to roam nearly all of America, with the exception of some areas in California. But in 1960, the wild wolf range was minimized to North Minnesota and Wisconsin. As the human race branches out farther into nature, more and more species are going to pay the price. Habitat destruction is the reason why 95% of the animals protected by the ESA are at risk of extinction. The history of the relationship between wolves and people has been one of great misperception. From the moment the colonists stepped onto New World territory, wolves were labeled as enemies. This happened for a number of reasons. Wolves presented competition, feeding on the same animals colonists did. Wolves were notorious for killing precious livestock, and wolves were an unfamiliar and unpredictable species. Interactions between humans and wolves were rare. There were few wolf sightings, and thus colonists resorted on gaining their information from myths. There were 2 different types of myths told about wolves. One was the lone wolf story, in which the wolf has supernatural powers and threatens the community. The other was the werewolf superstition, in which an innocent soul is transformed by witchcraft into a hell-possessed and devil-driven wolf. The folktales about wolves were actually influenced by Christianity and rooted from Greek mythology. Satan was once depicted as a werewolf. It was because of this link between Satan and werewolves that those accused were sentenced to death. Folktales depicted wolves as bloodthirsty, cannibalistic, betraying, and ferocious. In the 1940s, it was very common for articles on wolves to include the attack. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that the realization came that wolves were not much more different than dogs. But it wouldn't be until 1978 that wolves would formally enjoy any federal protection. Part of the reason why wolves were deprived of protection for so long was the fact that they presented a threat to livestock and preyed on the same game animals colonists did. In New Amsterdam, the wolves had killed so many sheep that only 20 remained by the year 1643. In the 1700s, people began to notice the lack of game animals. Radical ideas of extinction entered the conversation. By the 1800s, it was clear that a number of species were going extinct. Scientists estimated by the 20th century nearly all game animals would become extinct unless severe changes were made. The government then restricted hunting to certain seasons. Only now is the government really starting to realize the consequences of ignoring nature's welfare. Wolves are one of many species that have experienced great population deficiency, but one of few species that have been intentionally exterminated by the efforts of the government. Trapping, shooting, and poisoning allowed the Animal Damage Control, a federal wolf extermination squad, to wipe out nearly all wolves native to North America in only a couple decades. It wasn't until the 60s and 70s that there was attempts to recover lost wolf populations. In 1987, the Northern Rocky Mountain Recovery Plan was completed. The plan focused on reintroduction of wolves in 3 areas: northwest Montana, central Idaho, and Yellowstone National Park. Reintroduction of wolves into Yellowstone proved to be a highly debated topic. William Penn Mott, the director of the National Park Service, pushed reintroduction. He made many efforts to preserve wolf populations. In 1990, a report was given to Congress by the Fish and Wildlife Service and National Park Service. Today, natural recovery of species versus reintroduction is not the preferred method of recovery because it causes the species to potentially be removed from the list. Attitudes towards wolves now are generally for protection. The level of biodiversity has been declining for the last couple centuries. Human overpopulation and other anthropogenic factors have caused the extinction and endangerment of many animals. Wolves are just one of them.